I'm Leo Warder for Kit Guru. This case is the Corsair Obsidian 500D. Hard to believe, but it's been 4 years since my last Obsidian review. That was the 450D back in February 2014. And while the 450D and the 500D might sound like this is going to be an incremental change, I can find almost no common factors between those two cases, which in a way is a good thing. It's been 4 years after we'd expect a lot of change. So this is an ATX case. It's black in colour. That's pretty much it. Previously Obsidians were really angular, all 90 degrees and such like. This has got some quite swoopy sort of curves to it. Let's go through it piece by piece, starting with these side panels because they're a big part of the case. So we've got windows on both sides, smoked glass, as you can see. They swing off on these pivot pins and just lift away. Really swish, lovely, heavy, well made, and they feel good. Now the doors on both sides are symmetrical, so I'll just reach over and remove the second door. And once that's removed, you can see the innards of the case properly, and you can see much more of the build. Now the thing is, you can see quite a lot of illumination going on. None of the illumination that you can see is actually part and parcel of the Corsair case itself. It comes with no lighting whatsoever. A non-RGB case, which is worth labouring, because in this day and age that's quite unusual. There are actually 3 different lots of lighting going on. The ASRock X299XE Tai Chi motherboard that we've got in there, that has some illumination on board, not a lot but some. The G-Skill Trident Z RGB RAM has an awful lot of RGB going on, although at the moment it's just set to a kind of pulsing blue. That's quite deliberate, as we've seen previously, and I'll show you a bit of B-roll. It can really do a whole lot of rainbow stuff. The blue has been chosen to match the Sapphire Nitro Plus Vega 64 graphics card because that has the Sapphire blue thing going on. So there are actually 3 different lots of blue going on, but they are all completely independent. The absence of any RGB in the case is either a problem or, if you choose to take the alternate point of view, a breath of fresh air. With the side panels removed, you can get a good look inside the case, and you can appreciate just how heavily smoked those glass panels are, which raises one of those time-honoured questions. If you can't see inside the glass properly, what is the point in having glass at all? Well, in this instance, it's obviously on the main side to show illumination, provided you install some illumination. On the back side, that's a very good question. What is the point of a glass panel that shows off all the messy interior? Now, in this instance, Corsair has included a cable sort of cover to keep a lot of the mess out of sight. It's a little bit fiddly to get the cables behind it and then put it into place. We have experienced this before with the Crystal 570X, and the core chassis is based on the 570X. It's certainly familiar. With the cabling more or less hidden away, what's the point in having a glass panel to show off the innards? What's the point in having a glass panel that's smoked, that barely shows off the innards? After all, you're not going to have illumination on the back of the case, are you? So that is a good question. It obviously adds expense, and it seems entirely unnecessary. It just brings a kind of symmetry to the case. So in that respect, I like it. In most other respects, it seems frankly silly. And I know from previous comments on previous reviews that Kit Guru readers tend to have a similar view. The second glass panel, no thanks. The interior is very clean and tidy. All the drives are on the back side. I've opted to use an M.2 SSD on the motherboard itself, and you've got a power supply cover which is covering our Seasonic Prime titanium 600 watt fanless power supply. The 450D Obsidian had an open design. It had the conventional drives in front of the power supply setup. Here it's completely open, and it did not have a power supply cover. This is much tidier, no two ways about it. The power supply cover is riveted in place. The front of the power supply cover that kind of shuts it off is screwed, so it would appear that if you chose, for some reason, I can't quite imagine why you'd want to, you could remove the front of the power supply shroud to open it up, but it seems entirely unnecessary, and I presume that little bit of cover gives the shroud some strength. It gives it some rigidity, so best left alone. It is also interesting to note that the front panel and the top panel are fixed in place. Now, I'm quite sure that if you really got down and dirty with a screwdriver from inside, you could remove them, but they're not designed to be removed. And this is intriguing because this case is fully filtered. There's a filter on the bottom on the power supply, there's a filter on the front, there's a filter on the top. It's designed to take liquid cooling, so the front can have up to a 280 or a 360 liquid cooler, the top can have a 240 or a 280. With this case you get two Corsair 120mm SP120 fans. One is mounted in the front and one at the rear when the case is supplied. However, I've shifted the front fan to the top position because I wanted to mount my Corsair H115i liquid cooler, that's a 280, in the front. The front can accommodate a 280 or a 360, the top a 240 or a 280. I don't doubt that the Corsair cooler would have gone on the roof of the case. I prefer to put it in the front because I don't really like to overshadow the motherboard with the cooler in the roof. It's not ideal to me. And in terms of cooling, whether the cooler is at the front drawing air through and then expelling it wherever, it basically works the same as if you mount the cooler in the roof. I know the roof sounds the more logical approach, but it doesn't make any difference in the great scheme of things. So the hoses are possibly slightly untidy coming to the front, but if it goes to the roof they have to kind of loop back on themselves, 6.5 dozen of the other. Moving the fan from the front to the roof is actually dead straightforward because as with the side panels, which are symmetrical, similarly there are some fan cooler sort of rack mount things in the front and in the roof. Two thumb screws inside the case, a little bit awkward, but you can get to them reasonably easily. Remove those, out come those brackets. They're similar to the setup that we saw with the Fractal Design Define R6, except the Fractal got that slightly wrong with the bracket they put in the roof because it had kind of two sets of mounting holes that you could sort of hook the thing into, and it's really easy to get the bracket in the wrong one. In this instance, there's only one sort of set of slots that you can plug the bracket mount cooler thing into, so you can't get it wrong. What I did find was, however, it was possible to get it very slightly out of true, in which case it would rattle, so you had to make sure it's seated correctly, but once it was in and locked down, it's as good as gold. And the reason that you need to remove this bracket to install your cooling is not just for the convenience to be able to do it on the bench, because installing fans and such like in a case can be awkward. I mean, that's just a fact of life. It's because the top and the front panels are fixed in place, so you can remove them, but actually if you want to get the dust filters out, you just simply slide them out. Magnets, you see, magnets. So it's a steel core chassis, the front and the top panels are aluminium, as indeed those side panels, but strong magnets actually. But that filter slides across and just sits in place. Same with the top. Now, apart from wrestling the magnets, and they're only teeny magnets, so surprising just how effective they are, but it does mean that you don't have to dismantle the case to get to the filters, which is a really neat trick. The bottom filter is dead easy to access as well. So that's all good. It does mean that it's a curious thing. The case is kind of designed outside in. The outer structure that you can see here is fixed to get to anything you work inside it. So the filters come out, the cooling racks come out, job done. Now, if you choose to not use an H115i liquid cooler like this, you can instead mount some custom loop cooling on the floor of the case. There's a whole bunch of perforations and such like to mount a pump or pump bracket, which is a good thing. I think it's fair to say in this day and age that most people that are mounting a custom loop system would actually use a bracket to mount the pump reservoir unit directly to the radiator. So you don't need extra pump mount holes, but the fact these are down the bottom out of the way means there's no harm in having them there whatsoever. It doesn't cost anything to punch a few holes in a piece of steel. Pennies, literally pennies. There's no harm in that, but on the other hand, it does give you the option of proceeding that way should you choose. So that's a good thing. I don't much like the fact those Corsair SP120s are 3-pin fans and do not have PWM control. It does mean the case is rather noisy. Even though I've got the motherboard control on those fans set to silent mode, they're still quite raughty, as indeed are the fans on the H115i liquid cooler. The open nature of the case means that air flows easily in and air flows easily out. Obviously I've currently got the side panels off, but the fact is it doesn't make a lot of difference to the noise levels having the side panels off, having them installed. Surprising but true. Balanced against that, this case cools like an absolute champ. So our 8-core Core i7 7820X Skylake X CPU idles 21 degrees. It's winter here still in the UK, so it's that's only a few degrees above ambient. Under maximum load 53 degrees, which is pretty darn impressive. GPU 23 degrees idle, 69 degrees under max load. Now it has to be said, Sapphire has done a stunning job with this Vega 64 graphics card, but nonetheless that is an impressively low figure. It suggests the combination of this case and the cooler on the Vega 64, Corsair, Sapphire, you've done fine work. That is really a lot cooler than I would expect to see. Very pleased. So temperatures, very, very good. Noise levels, slightly aggravating, but there is no denying that this case is currently accommodating a really high-end gaming system. 8 cores of Core i7, Vega 64, whole bunch of Trident Z RGB, M.2 SSD, fanless Seasonic power supply. What more do you want? I mean, it's a monster PC, and it looks the part. A clever man once said that the thing about production engineering and clever design is that it allows a clever person to build a thing for $1 that any fool can build for $10. Now, Corsair throughout this case has used clever design. The core chassis is one that they've already got, the Crystal 570X, which is a steel ATX core chassis. Nothing particularly wonderful about it. It does a certain job. They've got the drives around the back. I mean, so they've got some mounting holes for the drive sleds. That doesn't cost them anything much. You've got a power supply cover, which is clearly a piece of bent steel riveted in place, cheap as anything. You've got an open structure. You've got a pair of SB120 fans. There's no lighting, no fan hub, no bells and whistles. Those curved glass and aluminium side panels are going to be a significant part of the bill of materials of this case. Then you've got this front panel, which is plastic but looks like aluminium, and the aluminium top panel, which is going to add a certain amount of expense. A whole bunch of fasteners to hold it all together. Job done. At first glance, Corsair has used these clever bits of design to cut the bill of materials and to cut the price of the case. But the fact is, it is not a cheap case, despite the fact you don't get any RGB, you don't get any fan control, you don't get any clever bells and whistles, because let's face it, Corsair sells all those as separate parts and separate accessories. So you line it all up and you think, well, what price should it be? I don't know, maybe £100, maybe £120. Well, the thing is, the list price for this case is going to be $150 US, 14999, and it's looking like it's either going to be $139.99 or $149.99 here in the UK in pounds, dollars 1 to 1, which is becoming obviously a thing. That price is slightly higher than I would like, and the fact is I admire this case. There's lots of good things about it, but the price just takes the shine off. It's a decent ATX case that's quite clever. I was about to say the list of features is impressive, but actually the list of features is almost non-existent. But the things you can do with the case, on the other hand, plenty. You can either stick a bunch of drives around the back or not. I mean, this has got one single M.2 in it, and that's quite a reasonable amount of storage. If I choose to bung a hard drive around the back, loads of storage, or I can add an SSD or 2 or 3. The cable management is neat and tidy. It all works. The front panel is a good front panel. So we've got a couple of USB 3.0s. We've got one Type-C USB 3.1 Gen 2, or if you prefer USB 3.1. We've got headset jacks, and we've got power and reset buttons in the usual style. So that's all good. There's nothing about this case to dislike. If you're thinking about going down the custom loop route, then maybe the fact that the side panels are so heavily smoked is going to put you off, because you want people to see the innards properly. The illumination does shine through, so you'll need to illuminate it, but that's just a given. But if you're relying on a little bit of white light and you want people to see whatever colour you've chosen, it's not really going to work. But the fact is, at the moment, Corsair is an all-in-one liquid cooler company rather than a custom loop company. As things stand, this case fits into Corsair's portfolio absolutely perfectly. If you want the full bling glass, that Crystal 570X is a perfectly decent choice instead. This case, on the other hand, open main compartment, drives around the back, power supply hidden away, plug it all together, hide the cables, job done. What's not to like apart from the noise and the price? So it's been 4 years since our last Obsidian review. Obsidian 500D is very different to 450D, not least because you don't get an optical drive bay any longer. Times have moved on. This case has upped the game from that 450D. It shows the modern trends such as a Type-C USB 3.1. There's an awful lot to like, but I'm going to say it here and now. While I like this case and I admire this case, there are other cases such as that Fractal R6 I prefer more. So I think this one, while it looks like an innocuous, understated stealth type of case, I think it's actually going to kick off a little bit of controversy. I think it's going to have some people that love it to bits and others that wouldn't touch it. And it's a funny thing, because when I started this review, I really thought this is going to be a case for the common man that's going to go straight down the middle of the road. And actually, I don't think it does. I think it divides the buying public. You're going to get some people that want it because they can just bung their hardware in and it's going to look pretty enough and work. And others, the people who are more into the bling and the custom loop and the RGB, are going to go, nah, it's not for me. Having said all that, it's a good case and it cools amazingly well. If you like this video, thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down. If you want more from Kit Guru, click to subscribe. I'm Leo Waldock. This is the Corsair Obsidian 500D.